Welcome to Dekom, Law and Disorder.
The views expressed on this podcast are Peter Dekom's opinions based on his legal experience, research, and academic work. The podcast does not offer legal advice. For any legal matters, always consult an independent attorney who can assess your specific situation. And now, on with the show.
Hi, everybody. It's Peter Dekom again, on with my nefarious podcast. And people want to know a little bit more about me. I hope that it's not the authorities that are searching, but I am a U.S.-born American citizen, immigrant parents, and almost everybody in my family worked for the government because I was born in D.C., which is now home to a lot of fun soldiers. But I moved when I was just 13 to Beirut, Lebanon, as my stepfather, the person my mom remarried, basically as a U.S. foreign diplomat, foreign service, and we were posted to Beirut. So there I go to Beirut, and boy, is it weird looking. I'd never been out of the country and almost never been out of any place other than the East Coast. So I didn't know anything about the place. And I also realized that most Americans don't know anything about the Middle East. There are a lot of assumptions about it. So I'm going to do something strange and weird, which of course is my style. And that is do something 100% off the top of my head, which is probably to explain in reasonable terms why the United States basically screwed up the Middle East so badly that everything that's going on right now is probably a direct derivative of those missteps. And there are going to be a lot of things that are going to surprise you. I'm going to talk about the difference in the various forms of Islamic faith and the population that lived there at the time and how the United States dealt with it. We're talking about a time period which basically harkens back to post-World War II, and this is a decade or plus past that. But the United States has already begun making fun mistakes by the dozen by the time I got to Lebanon. And the mistakes basically were we were morbidly terrified of something called communism. And I'll give you a shortcut on how to understand communism. Communism is socialism with violence, elites, and forced belief. It has privileged, correct thought, cadres running around making sure you're doing the right stuff, and secret police up the yin-yang. Socialism is simply the ownership of the government by the means of production, land, etc. And no, if you have public education or you have welfare or you have Social Security, those are social programs and not socialism. So let's go back and take a look at what the United States did. With Stalin rising and obviously very quickly having stolen our nuclear secrets, testing its own nuclear weapons, the United States was morbidly afraid of communism. So American government was willing to sell its soul to any country that was anti-communist, willing to tolerate the most incredibly awful autocrats imaginable, dictators who killed people, slaughtered people, and had secret police. So let's start with Iran. Circa, I'd say early 50s. The United States, 1953, decided that it wanted to bolster a very strong anti-communist regime in Iran. So they actually resurrected a powerful family in Iran called the Pahlavi family, Pahlavi. And the Shah, who is the head of the government, became the king. He also was very Trumpy in the fact that he loved people saying good things about him. He loved being worshipped and adored. He loved putting on cool military uniforms and being absolutely traveling around the world and treated as a head of state. He loved all that stuff. And anybody who opposed him, well, your life expectancy was not long. The secret police were called Savak, and Savak was absolutely terrifying the locals like crazy. So in 1953, we installed him to run Iran, and we gave him top flight weapons. I mean, he had F-14 Tomcats, but when they first came out, he had everything he needed. And Israel and Iran were close allies. There were flights between Tehran and Tel Aviv. There were military exchanges. There was military cooperation. Most people cannot imagine Iran and Israel being remotely close. Well, first of all, let's look at what Iran was in terms of its faith. Iran was, and still is, well over 90, maybe 95% Shiite Muslim. What is a Shiite? I mean, a lot of people think it has a lot to do with where the derivation, it came from Cousin Ali or from Muhammad, etc. Those are superficial differences between Sunniism, which accounts for 80% of global Islam, and the Shia faith, which accounts for probably around 20%. The Shiites are mystics. They tell you, don't bother reading Quran, you'll never understand it. It's too complicated. Let the local religious leader, way back when, like in the early phases of the Shiite faith, it was called an imam, and the imam was like the pope of the Shia faith. So the pope, the imam, would tell you what to believe. Well, somewhere in the 10th century, the 12th imam kind of disappeared, and kind of Shia faith disappeared with it. The Sunni faith, on the other hand, the majority faith, is a belief in Islam, very evangelical and fundamental Protestant view of it. Basically, you read the Quran, it is what it is, and you got to believe what it says, literally. Now, Arabic is normally, if you look at it, it's a bunch of lines and a couple of dots over them. That's casual, colloquial, Arabic. And that basically, those little dots are vowels. You just don't know which vowels they are. You have to know what the word is. If you read the Quran, it has formal Arabic, and every little dot, every little nuance is spelled out in that Quran. So now you have these evangelical fundamentalists. You get sometimes a little more subtle than that, but fundamentals, and we call those Sunnis. And we have these mystics who've lost their leader and are considered by Sunnis to be heretical. It's like the Papists versus the Protestants. You've seen a lot of these parallels in other religions. And so you have these two forces, the two major religious forces. Sure, there are others. There's an Islamic minority called the Druze, which is basically a small sect of people who are interrelated. You can't become one and choose to become one. You have to be born into the sect. And there are other minority guys, faith in Islam. But to understand the complexities of Islam in the Middle East, it is very important to understand the difference between Sunnis, the literalists, and Shiites, the mystics. So literally, the Shiites kind of drifted around. They didn't have a leader. Once that leader just sort of disappeared, the imam disappeared, they kind of unraveled a little bit. And a lot of the Sunni powerful leaders, the clerics, would say things like the only good Shiite is a dead Shiite, not a very welcoming way. And a lot of times Shiites were hunted down by Sunnis and rendered en route to the afterlife, which, by the way, in Islam, everybody gets judged on Judgment Day. In the meantime, you're put in storage, unless you die as a martyr, in which case you go directly to heaven. And even though the Quran does not provide for this anywhere, a lot of Muslim fighters, especially Sunnis, believe that they go off with 72 virgins or whatever it is in heaven. All I can tell you, I'm figuring out there's 73 people in heaven who don't know what the hell they're doing. But anyway, moving right along, that's not in the Quran. It just became a common belief. Laws perpetrated pursuant to the Quran under Sunni rule, that's called Sharia. Sharia is not part of the Quran. It is an interpretive legal system that evolved from primarily nomadic tribes. And if you think about a nomadic tribe, and it's all important to understand where all this came from. You're riding out in the desert, going from one oasis and water well to the next with your camels, your animals, your family, setting up a tent as you go along. It's a very small group of people in a very, very, very harsh environment. It can go up to 140 degrees in the daytime. So if anybody does anything wrong, like you seduce someone else's daughter or wife, it disrupts the caravan, it disrupts the community, and could lead them into starvation and internecine battles. So you'll see a very strict code of Sharia that grew out of that. Why people lose their hands, why adulterers are stoned. It came out of a survival mode. Unfortunately, even after you started having luxury limousines driving down the street of Riyadh, people still administered the Sharia code. You still get your hand cut off if you're caught stealing in Saudi Arabia. There are all kinds of nasty little things like that. But let's get back to the 1950s and 60s when the United States was just piling military weapons into the Shah's little military combat units. He loved this stuff. He loved the toys. He looked at the tanks, he looked at all the stuff. Boy, was he powerful. Meanwhile, overseas, somewhere in a place called France, I'm not sure where that is, but in a little town, tiny little village called Paris, there was a group of Shiites who hated the Shah and began to gather. There were also clandestine units within Iran that were really opposed to this brutal dictator, Shah Pahlavi. And lots of intelligence being generated, and don't laugh at this, but the US Department of State didn't even translate the stuff they got from intelligence, from newspapers, from people in cells, etc. So they didn't have a clue that this huge anti-Shah Shiite uprising was born. And it was under someone named Khomeini. That's the guy. And he was in Paris, and he had a lot of followers. But our guys weren't busy worrying about translating everything that's going on. They had no idea that a revolution was mounting. They had no idea that Savak was not all powerful. They had no idea that Pahlavi regime could ever fall. So they kept feeding him with weapons. They kept giving him whatever he wanted. And they never got it. So that's another mistake. So first we support the Pahlavi regime, shoved that monarchy into Iran, forced it. It got along really well with Israel, but it didn't get along with its own people. The brutal secret police, Savak, would pull up wearing masks or not wearing masks and showing up with no identification, picking you up off the street. Oh, no, that's California. No, Washington. No, that was Iran. And they basically thought nothing could ever take that group down. Meanwhile, the United States, being obsessed with anyone who's anti-communist, didn't fight the Franco regime, which didn't fall until 1975, or Augustus Pinochet in Chile. And that regime was eventually overthrown. We kept backing all these ultra-right-wing dictators with secret police and military pretensions because they were anti-communist, and that was enough for us. We didn't need anything else other than, oh, we hate communists, we love you, America. We kept making that mistake repeatedly. So meanwhile, this giant storm rises. We had basically, even when Savak and the Pahlavi regime recognized there was nascent stirrings of anti-Pahlavi sentiments in the country, all he did is ask for the United States not to support them and give him more weapons, which, of course, being stupid, we did. And once the folks took over, the Shiite fundamentalists took up and created the Islamic Republic in 1979 and took 444 days worth. They took the entire staff of the embassy captive, and they kept them there for 444 days. And the silly Carter administration didn't know how to mount a rescue effort, so those rescue efforts failed. And it was basically in a sort of at the end of the Carter world that we got our people back. But Iran hated the United States for having killed so many locals. And Israel was now the demon because Israel and the United States were joined at the hip. And so you got this massive wave of anti-Zionism in Iran. And now people in the area were taking a look and having to pick sides. The United States looked at all the documents that they didn't translate, they didn't read or didn't care about, and realized, oh, this was coming and we didn't see it. So now we have Iran settled. Syria, local place, I remember driving from Beirut to Damascus, and it was like you cross this mountain pass to leave Lebanon and go into Syria. And on the Lebanese side, people would be laughing and having a good time, and people would cross into Syria, and it was like, huh? They defined dour. It was gray. Nobody was laughing, telling jokes. And it was a place that you really wanted to get out of as quickly as you could. Back at Lebanon, when it was released by the French under the Vichy government in 1943, that's a whole interesting trip. It's a government completely and totally predicated on certain religions having certain designated participations in the government, which could not change. And that country at that time was about 52% Maronite Catholic, and the balance was a bunch of other sects, Sunnis, Shiites, Druze, etc. So what you have, for example, was a mandate that the president of the country had to be a Maronite Catholic. What? And basically the prime minister had to be a Shiite. And you go down the list, Minister of Justice, Speaker of the House, everyone had their own little bailiwick, and you couldn't change it. So all that happened in Lebanon, in case you wondered why it completely unraveled, there were probably 5 families in each one of these religious sects, and so when one of them didn't do a good job, they said, okay, we're getting rid of them, we're starting fresh. And instead of starting fresh, one of the other families would step in and do exactly the same thing. And that goes on right into the present day. That system of government is called confessionalism. And I confess it makes no sense. But now we're putting all the countries together that are there. Israel, in the meantime, is getting attacked left, right, and center in the 67 war, 73 war, all kinds of stuff, intifada, all that stuff is happening. And Israel is beating the crap out of the disorganized Arabs constantly. So they develop a mentality that is very defensive, very angry, and actually some of the best soldiers on the planet. So we have a very powerful Israeli military, and every time the Arabs try to invade, Israel picks up more territory. There's a good book, if you ever want to read how the Air Force and the Israeli Air Force started, read Angels in the Sky. It's hysterical and sad at the same time, but it's quite interesting. So now we have Israel sitting there fighting for its breath. We have a guy in Egypt named Jamal Abdel Nasser, and he was the god of the Middle East. Everybody listened to him, although when I listen to him, and I don't speak Arabic, but I can hear emotion. I heard Nasser, and I swear if you just translated Nazi German from Hitler into Arabic, they would meld into Jamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser was just vituperatively loud, angry, and spewing hate. He loved having Israel there because it gave him something to cheer for against. And Palestinians who had been driven out of their homes in 1948 basically were not allowed to assimilate in any of the local Arab countries. They weren't allowed to assimilate in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, anywhere. They were kept in what they called refugee camps. If you go to the refugee camps, and I've actually done this, they were surrounded by barbed wire and guarded. The children in those camps were given milk once in a while, always as a powdered format, not fresh. The plumbing systems within those little refugee camps were open sewers. They were disgusting places to be, and they tended to locate as many of these refugee camps with Palestinians in them, where they had a view of the lands that were taken over by Israel. And the little boys, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, were told your only mission in life is to bring us back to our family home. See it over there? It's that little white place right to the left of the. So you have a generation after generation of Palestinian children raised on dutiful hatred. You had people in nearby countries. You're not welcome in my country, but I'll use the Palestinian refugee issue to whip up hatred and against Israel so I can focus my salvation, my control of saving the entire Middle East. That was a Nasser plan. Okay, so now we have a completely screwed up mess where everybody hates everybody and people keep attacking and nobody is winning except the people who are winning. And that's all temporary. And so now we have, let's go back to lovely, fantastic Iran and move over one country. I haven't talked about Iraq. During World War II, Iraq was fought over and divided in World War I by the British and the French. Sykes-Picot Treaty in 1916, 17. Any event, Iraq was just carved up, lines on a map. If you look at a lot of the countries in the Middle East, you'll see there are a lot of straight lines. I don't know how to tell you this, but people don't live on straight, arbitrary lines. But that's what happened. So Iraq was roughly 60% Shiite, and it got into all kinds of Sturm und Drang and battles, yeah, and ultimately a 20% Sunni minority in Iraq took over under the name of a guy named Saddam Hussein, or as Bush would call him, Saddam. So Saddam Hussein and Iran remember, he's Sunni, he's running a Shiite country, and the Shiite country next door hates his guts and believes he needs to go. So Saddam Hussein also looks at oil and wants to have all of it. Remember in 1993, whatever, he went after Kuwait. But here he is, he hates Iran, so there's a war. It goes on literally for 10 years. Saddam Hussein was sure he was going to win. It ended up in stalemate with a lot of dead people. What did we do? We backed Saddam Hussein with everything we got, because at the time we looked at Iran, that it captured our entire embassy, kept them in prison for 444 days, and they kept chanting, "Death to Carter, death to Shah." I mean, they did. And they couldn't stand the United States, because guess where the Shah Pahlavi settled? Oh, Los Angeles, with all the blessings that the American government could give. So I can't tell you how hated America was by Iran for all the things that had been done by the Pahlavi regime and our continued protection of what they considered to be the great brutalist. So at the end of all of this stuff, it's even a bigger mess. So now what happens? The United States always made the assumption that Iran, being a theocracy, was quite contrary to a country that was used to very high quality education, very high levels of, they look at the Arabs as inferior. We're Persians. We even speak a different language, even though it looks like we write the same stuff. We speak Farsi, they speak Arabic. And we're superior. And in a lot of ways, they really were superior because of their educational system. Long before the Arabs settled anything, they were basically nomads. Whereas the Persians had these massively huge little cities. They had agriculture completely organized, all kinds of stuff. So there's always been an animosity between them. But, in the 7th century, Muhammad basically got the secret plans to how the military of the most basic Persians, how it worked, because the son of a disgraced general gave all the secret plans to Muhammad. And so when they finally walked in there, they conquered Iran. But the Persians, even though they were being force converted to Islam, decided to rebel a little bit and decided, we won't have the same kind of Islam. We'll have our own. We'll have a very smart imam telling us what the mystical, wonderful Bible/Quran tells us it should be. And that was a schism. That was the way they rebelled. So that's why you have, in the area of Iran, you have Shiites, and most of the rest of the world, you have Sunnis. Saudi Arabia is Sunni, Jordan's Sunni. You look at Egypt was Sunni. Turkey is Sunni. You look around and you see that the Sunnis literally controlled Islam. But this 20% sect was very, very bright and very powerful. And they basically built Iran again. In 1979, they had to figure out spare parts for the American jets they inherited. And they played it very tight. They hated the United States. And we just said, it's such a stupid idea of a religious theocracy running a country. It's going to implode, so just wait it out. 5 years passed, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It didn't fall. As we bombed Iran recently, the B-2 bombs taking out nuclear sites, enrichment sites in Iran, listen to the politicians. Well, the people of Iran, it's a chance, they're going to rise up and they're going to overthrow it. Cut to all the cities, every town in all of Iran, and what do you see? People cheering their government against this intruder calling the United States, trying to stop them from being self-contained and powerful enough to stop the United States in the future. Oh, by the way, we basically obliterated all that, and they had no chance of coming back. Even though the Mossad, Israeli intelligence, told us quite simply, you hit 3 sites, you did a lot of damage, they're already gearing up to keep going, and they got all their enriched nuclear material out of those sites long before you bombed it. You didn't end anything. They're back. It's going to take them a while to recover. Yes, you slowed them down, and yes, they're really understand the power of American stealth bombers. But we, by the way, launched from Missouri all the way over there with a lot of refueling along the way. Anyway, that basically was a myth that we perpetrated among ourselves, once again telling ourselves the theocracy in Iran is going to collapse. Instead, we bolstered that theocracy and made it even stronger, even though I'll tell you, the local intelligent, educated Iranians look at the entire fundamentalist Islamic Shiite movement as a little bit much. But in the meantime, we basically had a strange phenomenon in that Saddam Hussein had a proclivity to invade his neighbors, like Kuwait and stuff. And we had passed, after the Congress had passed, after the Vietnam War, a series of statutes that limited the power of the United States president to effectively wage war. Yes, only Congress can declare war, but we didn't have restraints on what the president could do in a way of, lesser conflicts. All these statutes passed because we got into the Vietnam War and we got creamed. We lost it. By the way, Ho Chi Minh once asked the United States for help early in the days. We told him to go engage in unnatural anatomical acts. And in the meantime, we look at this incredible country, Iraq, which is really kind of, But a guy named Dick Cheney, and I think he got the right first name, working for a classmate of mine at school named W, basically determined that we desperately needed to get rid of all those statutes that were hemming in the president. He believed in an ancient Roman theory called the unitary executive theory. And that is in times of rapid change, where having group decisions through a legislature would just take too much damn time. Do as the Romans do. Pick one person, call him Caesar, name a salad after him. Oh, no, that started in Mexico. I'm sorry. And let him run stuff. And then when its term is over, he'll leave and come back to the Senate. Never happened. They never came back. They liked power. But he thought the unitary executive is what the United States needed in times of rapid change with serious challenges. So he said, how do I do this? I need to repeal all those laws, so I need Congress to vote against itself. How do I do that? I'll manufacture a crisis. Yes, we'll have to fight a war against someone who's trying to destroy us. Because remember, once Saddam went into Kuwait, he became our enemy. We sent troops and beat the crap out of him, but we didn't remove him. And that was under prior president, H.W. Bush. Now Saddam was coming back and doing it again. So here's Saddam and Cheney the Dick. And Cheney the Dick basically said, I got to have a crisis. I got to feel that the United States is about to be attacked by, let's call them weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs. They have nukes. Well, I know they've got them. They're there. And when it was pretty clear they didn't have those, well, they have biological and chemical weapons. Remember, they had Chemical Ali, who worked for Saddam Hussein as one of his chemical bomb makers. And it was used by Saddam Hussein against his own people or anybody who rebelled. So we needed to have an excuse, and nothing like a war or a threat of a war, a threat of an annihilating war, to get Congress to wake up and say, okay, we made a mistake. We went overboard after the Vietnam War. We'll take those statutes and toss them away. So that basically was the beginnings of what became a very long legacy of wars, the United States and the Middle East. And what Dick did, never trusted Dick, what Dick did was to draft, or have his experts together draft, a statute long before it was presented to Congress, a 313-page document which became the Patriot Act. God, you got to have a name like a Patriot Act, because who would ever vote against Patriot Act? Because that would be, by definition, unpatriotic. So what happened is the George W. Bush administration, Dick Cheney as real president, convinced Congress that they needed to enact this statute, the Patriot Act, which repealed all those little nasty restrictions on the president, on an expedited basis. So on a Friday, all the members of Congress received a 313-page draft of the statute, the Patriot Act, and the vote was scheduled for Monday. Oh, that means they're really going to read it carefully and understand it and debate it thoroughly. Not exactly. Meanwhile, we have a very good general who will remain nameless since he passed away, who was our ambassador, Secretary of State, go to the United Nations and present photographs of these weapons of mass destruction. And all the people in the intelligence agencies were saying, they're not really weapons of mass destruction, dear. You really did. That's not real. But the administration, Cheney and Bush, basically said, if it doesn't reinforce our presentation of weapons of mass destruction, shut up. We don't, anybody to the contrary, we don't like facts in the United States. You may have gathered from all the statistics that are being removed from our consideration these days. That's for another another podcast. But in the meantime, all this stuff going down, the statute passed. Huh? What? You mean one of the most incredibly powerful statutes in the history of the modern United States passed without serious debate in 3 days, included the weekend? Huh? And yes, indeed, we began to roll into Iraq and roll over it. And we took out that nasty Saddam. And when we took over Iraq, we decided, because we know better than everybody in the world, we will install an American-style democracy where majority rules. Well, that may work, and sometimes it doesn't. But if you are making a new constitution for a country that is 60% of one faith and 40 or less percent, actually 20% of the other, and there's some Christians and others thrown in there, but it's a 60% Shiite majority, what kind of a government do you think you're going to get? It's going to be a secular government that's making rules that's good for everybody? Or could it possibly be a revenge government? We have never seen that before. A revenge and retribution-driven government by Shiites who are now, for the first time, controlling their Shiite country. By the time U.S. forces left Iraq, within 3 weeks, a famous, I'd call him an insurrectionist, but he was a leader of his own little army, the Mahdi army, Muqtada bin al-Sadr. And he was hiding in Iran. And the day our troops left, Muqtada al-Sadr brought his Mahdi army, and it was immediately absorbed into the Iraqi regular army. And it was a great day because, not for us. It was a great day if you happen to be Iran, because you now have a country, your bordering country, which is controlled by Shiites, that is now the most obvious and natural ally in the world. And as the United States went around the world talking about its ally Iraq, every time I heard those words, I started laughing internally. I didn't want to laugh externally because I could probably have been arrested by our version of Savak. Didn't want to do that. So you now have this mythology that Iran's going to fall because the government doesn't make any sense, right? And Iraq is our ally, even though it's absolutely allied with Iran. And now you're looking at Syria, which had been taken over by the Ba'athist Party and the al-Assad family. And they were members of a sect of Shia called the Alawites. Alawites make up about 10% of Syria. But Bashar al-Assad, and his father, the whole al-Assad family, were the brutal rulers of Syria. And because even though Syria is 80% Sunni, that 10% at the top was Shiite and immediately aligned with Iran and Iraq. So now you have Syria, Iraq, Iran. It's slowly becoming a little bit Shiite. And remember, Shia faith is a minority faith in Islam. So now what happens to another little country over there? What's Lebanon? And people in Lebanon began to look around and say, I'm looking at the neighbors around here. This isn't such a good neighborhood. So the rich Christians, the Maronites, and the rich Sunnis decided to pack up and go everywhere but Lebanon. You will find them as senior advisors to the Emirates, to Qatar, and you'll all find a bunch of them. You go to Mexico. Anyone here like tacos al pastor? It's a lovely Lebanese dish where they substitute pork for lamb because Muslims don't eat pork, but that is a Lebanese dish. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Spanish is Latin plus Arabic. Remember the Moors in Spain? Okay, never mind. So those of you who think you speak Spanish and it has nothing to do with Arabs, sorry, look at the architecture in Spain. Look at the Moorish influence. Look at the influence of all the Islamic architecture, and you see it all over Spain. The language is built on it. So now looking back at the Middle East, we have Israel, which gets attacked all the time. They don't like it. They're not having a good time. We have the Palestinians. Nobody likes the Palestinians. And the Iranians decide, you know what? We got all these allies around us. We better start funding people. We can run the entire Middle East. The Shia faith needs to fund all kinds of people. So it decided to fund a group of Muslims who are Sunnis in an organization called Hamas. Hamas is Sunni, but nobody gave them anything. Nobody cared about them. And by the way, they were elected in 2006, the last election you had in the Gaza area, by telling the world, we can get along with the Israelis. Huh? Oh, well, that was the last election about that. In the meantime, Hamas was beginning to get weapons and missiles, and Lebanon, which was basically the Sunnis and the Christians are leaving, the Shiites in that country said, this is a good time for us. We better take over this country. We'll call that group Hezbollah. Hezbollah now is getting shitloads of guns and weapons and money and stuff from Iran. So let's see what it looks like. We start at the Persian Gulf and we move east. Every country between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean is now occupied by Iran allies. They are really powerful. There's a rebellion in Yemen. Oh my God. And Saudi Arabia doesn't like what it sees, so it's fighting. But the Saudis are not used to being fighters, used to being hiring fighters. So this group called the Houthis, Houthis, is now founded and now slowly pushing out the legitimate government. And Iran is having a field day, shipping money, weapons, and all kinds of stuff to the Houthis. The Houthis, in the meantime, are really, really anti-Israel. They've joined Iran in this mantra from the river to the sea, get this country, push it back into the ocean, get it out of here, and let's bring the Palestinians back in. They wouldn't take the Palestinians in as residents in their countries, but they were very, very willing to use the Palestinians as pawns to make sure that the world got on their side. Meanwhile, the poor Palestinians, everybody shits on the Palestinians. I mean, I remember when I was in Lebanon, they literally didn't want Palestinians being made Lebanese citizens. Same with Egypt, same with Jordan, same with Syria. We want you guys to have your own homeland. Go get it. We'll give you some money, you go fight. Meantime, blow up things in Israel, Jerusalem, do bad stuff. So now what you've got is a complete reconfiguration. Iran is now clearly the most powerful country in the Middle East. It is developing nuclear weapons, and we had a treaty that we entered into. It's a joint collective agreement sponsored by the UN that involved the United States, England, Russia, others. And it basically said, okay, we'll stop our enrichment program for a period of 10 or 15 years. We won't do anything, and we'll have inspectors. Someone named Donald, I don't know whether it was a duck or the president, basically decided it was a bad treaty because he was getting beaten about the head and testicles by a guy named Netanyahu. What a bad name. Ooh, it could have been Netanyahu.com, but no, it wasn't. And he basically said, this is a shit treaty. I'm pulling us out of it. Now, our own intelligence services, all the military, CIA, and that's not the Culinary Institute of America, but basically said to the president, it's working. It's not a perfect treaty, and we're not stopping them from their, funding surrogates, but they're not developing, enrichment. That stopped. They're really not doing that. And Trump said, Netanyahu said, I shouldn't believe you, so I'm pulling the United States out of it. Almost immediately, those centrifuges started spinning around and generating nuclear enrichment material, stuff that is weapons grade, that you could make nukes that could be on warheads and bombs, driven across the border in trucks. But they were nukes, real honest to God, nuclear weapons. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, here I come. And we just said, we don't believe you. We will stop you. We can stop you. We'll bomb you. Netanyahu said, we'll always bomb. We'll never let you have a nuclear weapon. The problem is these stupid Iranians understood if you really dig deep enough and you have enough really, really, really deep holes in the earth, they can bomb the crap out of you. It doesn't matter. And that's what Iran did. All over Iran, there are military nuclear sites that are basically fully capable of having nuclear weapons. We hope they don't. And we allowed that to restart. Everyone told Trump, the minute you pull out that treaty, that's going to fall and the country will fall. It didn't. And Netanyahu said, well, they'll sit down and they'll negotiate a reasonable treaty with you and they'll cover their surrogates everywhere. They didn't. And the nuclear weapon threat got worse and worse and worse. We did have a few fun things with their lovely machines. We had something called Stuxnet virus, which stopped those machines from working, but they got replaced very, very quickly. In the meantime, we now have some really, really serious enemies. And we have gone out of our way to make sure that we back Israel in everything it does. Israel has a right to exist. We've always fought for it. We believe it, and it probably does. But as the horrors in Gaza are escalating, we're like the only country left in the modern Western world that is backing Israel. Everyone says, please stop it. Please stop sending weapons. But you can see how this all devolved because a bunch of idiot Americans after World War II, obsessed with anti-communism, decided that they were going to dictate all these people who are going to run countries around the world. Didn't matter whether they were right-wing murderous sacks of shit. They were okay as long as they were anti-communists. We would support them with military aid, maybe a little bit of payola here and there, but ultimately we would take care of them. And almost every one of them collapsed. Look at the Vietnam War. The guy who came to us begging for help for an independent country. We said, no, you're communists. We don't want you. The name communist is enough to scare us from helping you from doing anything. So he turned to Russia. What is he, stupid? No. North and South Korea, the war in the early 50s. Everywhere we turn, we were obsessed with communism. And we didn't realize that there was an entirely different struggle going on between oppressed peoples who had been subject to harms from military dictatorships that we funded, put in prisons that were built with US dollars, and collected and shoved into those prisons with weapons from the United States. So here we sit. We're wildly unpopular, but it's time to have tariffs. Tariffs are a story that I will tell in a different podcast, and we'll deal with it. We'll also be dealing with things like the Federal Reserve. It may soon be turned into the Federal Game Preserve because it may not be able to do anything else. We'll talk about that later. In the meantime, you're looking at the reconfiguration in the Middle East. I have to give Donald Trump some credit somewhere. And as he got Arabs and the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all together willing to deal with Israel, willing to stop messing around, that's when Netanyahu went a little bit crazy. But we did get them talking. There are peace treaties. It was Anwar Sadat, who was assassinated after he made a peace treaty with Israel. But the Arab world was coming to terms with the fact of, well, you know what? Israel has a right to exist. We're not going to fight it. We can make some money here. They've got good technology. We can deal with this. You're looking at Syria as trying to reconfigure, and there's a chance there too, but it's crazy, and we don't know what we're doing. We're idiots when it comes to the Middle East. I lived in a Middle Eastern country. I watched this up close and personal. I watched how we screwed up. And then when I went to college and beyond, I looked at things going. The day we went into Iraq looking for those WMDs, I said to myself, my classmate, George Walker Bush, has screwed up the Middle East for a century. And I guess I didn't feel good about it, and I didn't like being right. But you look around you and see how that looks. We'll go into other bits and pieces as the world progresses. But you start off understanding who a Shiite is, the mystic, who a Sunni is, the literalist. You look at the battles by political figures who didn't give a rat's ass about anybody other than their own political power. Gee, we've never seen that before. That's a brand new concept in history. Only we always cater to the bad guys. And the poor people, the losers, the ordinary human beings, didn't get the benefits of what we were basically able to provide. We could have been nicer. We weren't. We were so scared of communism, we would bolster the bully of the day as the leader, as long as the bully said, I hate communism. We did that with a guy named Batista in Cuba. You can see how that came out. We do a lot of stuff like this. We need to start understanding that the world is not necessarily stable if you produce support for people who hate their own people. If you have leaders who destroy the value proposition, that's not a good model for us to support. It's an even worse model for us, what we should never, ever, ever become. But if you don't believe me, remember I said that history is cyclical. Those who do not study are condemned to repeat its mistakes. That's George Santayana. But I said something else about history, and that is it's a spiral. Every once in a while, something will come and hit that historical cycle right in the face, and it could be an ice age, it could be a nuclear weapon, it could be AI, it could be any number of things, but that stops that from being a perfect circle. We don't go back to where we were. We spiral, circular in part, and moving in a different vector as time progresses. As I apply my sick analytical technique and approach to things, we'll look at how that impacts. And AI, I've talked about before, is one of those seminal, rockets to the gut that is going to change the earth as we know it. The internet did that. The automobile did that. And world wars, when they were fought, are we in a world war right now which is not fought in the old way of fighting world wars? Is it economic? Is it basically aligning people behind you? I'll close my little presentation with a little political reality that I learned in a Borana village in Kenya. There was a young leader. He was a tribal chief. And I said, okay, how did you become chief in this tribe? He said, well, the way our tradition goes, we have an election and all the people standing for chief stand in a line, and all those who are supporting that chief get in line behind them. Okay, how do you solicit votes? He said, well, normally what you do is you bribe people by giving them cattle. But I have a bunch of friends from New York had all these fake Rolexes. So I gave out these fake Rolexes and I won handily. And that, my friends, is the lesson for today. And that was a guy who didn't make a mistake. Go pick up the news, turn on your social media, and take a look at who is screwing it up. Thank you. Until next time.
If you would like to give feedback, suggestions for new topics, or have a question that might be selected for a future podcast, please email us at dekompodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.